So I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a trauma professional and a relationship coach and a mediator. But most times I'm working sort of under the umbrella of psychotherapy or coach. My specialty is in people who practice non-monogamy, as well as people who are looking for healing trauma and attachment. And often those two intersect a lot.
Really? How so?
Yeah, well, a lot of people, like my book, Polysecure, is about sort of the connection between non-monogamy and trauma and attachment. So as people sometimes are transitioning into a non-monogamous paradigm, there can be a resurgence of old traumas that come up or new ones they didn't anticipate as they lived in a marginalized experience or identity. And a lot of different attachment experiences as you sort of explore multiple partners. But it was one summer where I was working as a psychotherapist, and in the same week, all of the couples I was working with brought up non monogamy, that they were looking to open up, they were exploring it. And I knew about it personally, but not professionally. And I was like, oh, I've got to do my homework and get, and figure this out. Like, how do I support these couples in opening up? And at that time, there just wasn't a lot out there at all. And so I kind of had to figure it out and research and come up with things. And really, that's what sort of led me into this. And then it became word of mouth, and, it just snowballed from there.
And how long has it been since you kind of started focusing on this niche?
Yeah, maybe it's been 8 years or so that it's really become a focus. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm curious, I'm curious if from what you've seen from your perspective over those last 8 years, I'm guessing when you first kind of started researching and helping couples, non-monogamy, even consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, was very taboo.
Yeah,
Do you feel like it's kind of gotten a little bit less taboo in recent years?
it really has. It's still not where it needs to be. But there's been a big shift over this past decade for sure. Of it was something that just people didn't know much about, or it was sort of right taboo, or they thought it was just swinging, or they thought it was just a religious thing where girls are married to one man, like people just didn't understand it. And now we're seeing it in the media, we're seeing it in the news. We're seeing it in, dating apps where that can be a legitimate option that you check off or scroll down to say you're non-monogamous. So there's really been sort of this resurgence and blossoming of it in more of the popular culture, yeah, than it has been before.
It's interesting because, being from Live Jasmine, where we're from, we have noticed something similar where,
Yeah.
a lot of people use campsites for many different reasons,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always the assumption that it's, oh, well, people are just there to look at what they call porn, what they think is porn. We have seen that, obviously actual porn is free online. And so after I've interviewed hundreds of Live Jasmine's members, and the sexual component becomes almost the least of it, what they're seeking. But
Interesting.
yes, I think that may be what gets them in the door, but many of them have had the same relationship with the same model for 18 years, 15 years, 10 years. They are these long relationships.
Wow.
And so when I interview them, I ask the members, what has kept you on the site?
Yeah. What do they say?
That particular model, she just gets me. She
Mm.
listens to me. She understands me. So
Yeah.
I realized it really is about this interaction piece that person is getting that they weren't getting in their life.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I mean, I've heard stories of veterans who just wanted someone to talk to, and they never asked the model to undress or anything. They just wanted that feminine, nurturing, soft energy to be in
Yeah.
when they were overseas. And so, but what's interesting is when the pandemic hit, so similarly to what
Mm.
maybe has happened for polyamory and non-monogamy, when the pandemic hit, OnlyFans blew up. And then, online platforms
Yep.
became a lot more almost popular,
Yeah. Right.
and
Yeah.
almost pop culture because celebrities started doing it and being open about it.
Yep.
And so there's definitely been this shift, I think, in many different categories of sexuality or relationship that were super taboo. But it seems like there is a shift in people becoming more flexible in that area. Um, what I've seen with camming specifically, like I've said, is that the sexual flirty content, it's the least of it. Even in that, even when there is that interaction going on, the member is getting something, either
Yeah.
feeling like their needs are important or whatever the case is. But it's just so much deeper. I'm curious if you feel like, I'm sure a lot of people would say, oh, people who are non-monogamous, they just have no self-control or they have no commitment or whatever the case is.
Right.
Deeper reasons that you've seen for it.
Yes. Those are kind of the myths you just named or the prejudice. And that's usually not the reason at all. People who are non monogamous might really feel that just on a sexual level, they want diversity of sexuality, sexual expression, different styles, different humans, different bodies, different, everything. And they feel that's how they fundamentally are. For some people, it's more of a romantic experience, right? Where they feel the capacity to love more than one person is what's driving this desire to be polyamorous. And for many people, like even the research shows, rarely do they actually say sex, sort of like what you're saying. When people rate their top reasons for their polyamory, or non-monogamy, it's usually having like more deeper connections, more personal growth, more support in their life, and like a variety of just non-sexual hobbies and interests and experiences that they get to have through multiple partners.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, and it's both though, right? I think some people are more emotionally non-monogamous, some are more sexually non-monogamous, or both. Yeah. But it's rarely that they just have commitment issues and that's why they're doing it. Because it takes work. Actually, like being in a non-monogamous relationship takes more communication. It takes more effort to be in it. So someone who has avoidant or commitment issues is actually not going to do well in that kind of situation.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I know people that have been in non-monogamous relationships, consensual, and it brings up a lot of their stuff that it's very
Yeah.
triggering.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a fast track to your personal growth because a lot will get exposed through being non-monogamous, and you have the opportunity to deal with it or not.
Something else that some of the members have told me as a reason that they're on Live Jasmine is because they do crave variety and they do have a partner, but their
Yeah.
partner isn't comfortable actually introducing someone into the mix physically. So
Hmm.
having a relationship online with a model has been the compromise. I'm
Yeah,
curious if you've heard of that at all.
I have heard of this, and I think it's a great solution, honestly, because non-monogamy is not for everyone. And so when you have a pairing like you're talking about of someone who does just feel like, I love my partner, I'm here in this relationship, but I do need variety and diversity, but their partner isn't actually into that, it's like, then this is a great solution, a win-win, I think.
Mm.
Yeah. I think people, as they hear about it, they didn't know previously that it was an option because monogamy is such so much of the norm, especially in within the US, but many other places and cultures as well. And so it does awaken something in them like, wait, there's other options of love or sex or relating, and they're interested. Yeah. But I think many people find that they open up and it's like they're a teenager again, dating for the first time because they didn't have a lot of experience before they were maybe in their marriage or in that primary relationship.
Why do you think it is that we're not encouraged to explore or know ourselves sexually from a younger age?
Yeah, I think there's still like we're moving into this body positivity and sex positivity as just narratives that exist now that they didn't really exist when I was growing up. There's still that leftover of even Puritan culture, and of different religious cultures that really shame sexuality, shame the body, shame pleasure, shame self pleasure, right? And we're still just kind of coming out of that. So I think a lot of parents, even that might have wanted to encourage, they just didn't have the language, or they didn't know what to do with their children exploring sexuality, how to talk about it in a healthy way or an age appropriate way. There's just been so much like fear and shutdown around it. And there's a lot of sexual trauma that people haven't been able to get the support they needed, maybe for their sexual trauma. So then when they have a child going through puberty or even before, exploring themselves, they don't, their trauma gets activated and they don't know what to do.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of reasons individually within families, and then just the larger culture and society that we're in.
Do you feel like in your interaction with your clients, there is a shift in people being more willing to explore these things even with their children, or wanting them to be more sex positive and figure it out?
Yeah.
Or is there still just this like, no, we don't talk about it till they're maybe 18?
Right. I see both. I still see places where people don't know how to talk about it, even if they want to. And then I see so many parents who are listening to podcasts or bringing like child appropriate books to their children, even just about anatomy, but also about sexuality. Or having even books or stories that just include, maybe they're not about sex itself, but include people of different sexual orientations. So yeah, it's so good that there's more resources, and I see people turning to those.
What would you say is one of the most surprising things you've learned about human sexuality or human relationship in your 8 years of really kind of focusing on polyamory with couples or people?
Yeah, the most surprising thing. That's a good question. I think what surprises me is that because the transition from monogamy to non-monogamy is such a significant paradigm shift, that what I think someone might be before is not always what they turn into. Or I might have someone who they just seem like they're so resistant to it and it's not what they want, but then they actually try it because their partner is asking them to, and there's enough willingness, and then they absolutely love it. So I think it's more like individuals have surprised me. Yeah.
Interesting. So
Mhm.
that willingness to try and explore, have you seen it be disastrous or more beneficial than disastrous, or equal?
I think the willingness I've actually seen be more beneficial. The disastrous part of non-monogamy can be more when people are going too quickly. They become more self-focused on what they want, their freedom, their needs at the expense of a relationship, right? Or they've made agreements and then they're not following through on those. That's where the disasters happen, right? And obviously, even in non-monogamy, there can still be sort of cheating or betrayal or deception that happens. Yeah. But when people are, aside from those things, when people are just like, let's experiment and explore, I see that as beneficial for the most part, as well as knowing when you've reached limits and need to pause.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. What would you say are, I know I touched on a few of them earlier, but what would you say are the biggest misconceptions
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
about non-monogamy?
People,
Yeah.
right. Yeah. I think the biggest one is that it's just about sex, that maybe it's a sex addiction, that it's a commitment issue, or like a product of an avoidant attachment style. I think those are the biggest misconceptions. Or that you're doing it because you're not happy with your original partner if you're in a relationship. Yeah.
Very interesting. So you would say that those are the misconceptions, and in general, the people that are in these types of dynamics are, that's the way they're more wired maybe than monogamy, than formal.
Yeah. Regarding that, I see people describe it as both sort of either their orientation, the way they're fundamentally wired, or some people would say they don't know if they're wired that way or not. Maybe but they philosophically really are on board with it. They see this whole idea that one person is supposed to meet every single one of our needs for the rest of our life as an impossible standard, right? So, or they themselves want to explore certain things about their sexuality or sexual styles. Yeah. So I think that's how people usually describe it. But yes, the things we just named, those are common misconceptions.
It's interesting because this word explorer, we've both been using it,
Yeah.
and um it's actually another one of the biggest reasons people tell me that they want, or they tried out Live Jasmine because they had a fantasy they wanted to explore,
Yep.
or a kink or something like that, that either they didn't have a partner and they still wanted to explore it, or they had a partner that wanted nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they felt judged, honestly, for having
For
that
having that.
desire.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
so people are turning to sites like Live Jasmine, or I'm sure other sites, to explore themselves. I do think that exploring our sexuality and our sexual identity is actually really important, because so many of us have just kind of adopted what we're told culturally is right or cool.
Yeah. What we see happening in the movies.
Right. And it may not be actually true to our true desires.
Yeah.
But how can we know what those are
Without experiencing it. Yeah.
or exploring? Do you have any maybe practical tips for anyone who's listening that's like, yeah, I have no idea what I like?
Yeah, I do. Like you just said, explore your fantasies. So what are some of your fantasies that you go to or are afraid to go to, or dreams that even happen, sexual dreams? So just looking at that and seeing, is that a trailhead to something that you want to experience more of? Right. Or if you're feeling kind of bland and bored with maybe the sex that you've been having, right? Like, okay, what could you imagine being more erotic and exciting that you would want to have? That would be one way. And I love the erotic blueprint. Are you familiar with this?
I am,
Yeah.
but please, for anyone listening that's not.
Yeah, so people probably know of the five love languages. That's become more pop culture for good reason. There's the different ways that we give and receive love in different languages. And so the erotic blueprint's like that equivalent of there's five different styles of sexuality. And they're energetic, sensual, sexual, kinky, or a shapeshifter who kind of does all four at once or sort of in a row, or can do all four of those and needs them. And so that's another way that I have people go figure out your erotic blueprint or blueprints. What are the styles? And even go through exercises of trying out some of the styles you might not have experience in. Yeah. And that often can open up a lot for people.
I think that's a good idea, is trying out some of the styles and seeing
Yeah.
what just feels best. Like, obviously the love languages we've all had, more or less, right? But in general, we've all experienced someone giving us a compliment, or giving us
Mm-hmm.
a gift, or helping us with something, or spending time with us, or touching us.
Yeah.
And we know what activates us the most out of those five things. However, the erotic blueprints, that is something that I think a lot of people still don't even know about.
Don't even know about. Right.
And so, trying out, if you want to just quickly describe maybe one characteristic of each.
Yeah, so energetic goes along usually what people think of as tantra, but not always, but it is about this energetic connection between someone and the anticipation and the buildup. And it's not necessarily about genitalia. It can be just like, almost touching is erotically arousing. The sensual is the five senses. So it's like, yes, give me tickles, give me a bath, feed me strawberries, have the music and the lights all being right. The sheets are the right kind of, texture. Sexual is what we normally think of, that we kind of see in the movies, or porn typically is a sexual style where it's like penetration and, different positions, maybe some lingerie. It has that sort of archetype. And obviously kink is a whole universe. There's so many different types of physical kink, psychological kink, different dynamics of BDSM. So that's a whole spectrum of experiences. So those would be sort of, the different ways it shows up. And so, right, even people hearing me now, it's like, oh, they might realize, wait, like, think of how you like foreplay too. Do you want that anticipation and some energetic buildup, or do you want someone to massage you or to give a massage, or do you just want to start making out and get right to it? Right. Or do you want a scene that is a role play or something like that?
And the fifth one is the shapeshifter, which is all of them.
Yeah, they can really go in and out of different styles, maybe just one style for that interaction, or they might need, like, I need all of this happening at once for me. Yeah, I think of the shapeshifter as like the O blood type, the universal blood type that can give to all. But usually a shapeshifter is most satisfied when they are with another shapeshifter.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because they're good at meeting, if they have a person who's really in one style, they might enjoy that, but they're going to not feel fully satisfied because they have a wider range of possibility that their eroticism is sort of looking for.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
What's interesting too about these erotic blueprints is I almost see it as not just, what lights you up purely sexually, but even in some ways, for some, especially the sensual, it's
Mm-hmm.
like how you receive pleasure,
Yeah, absolutely.
deeply enjoying the smell of a candle or
Yes.
some soft music or, really, or enjoying a hot cup of tea. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like those
Yes.
things will bring you immense pleasure.
Exactly. I mean, how your house is set up will usually say a lot about the style. Yeah, I have a friend who's a sensual, and like her house has just plush pillows and textures and blankets, like, and the furniture's like on the floor. And when she eats, she like licks her fingers. It's just like all sensual, and we're not in a sexual exchange. Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I think that's a great practical tip is for people to explore their erotic blueprint, figure it out, and maybe try a few on. Um,
Mhm.
anyone listening that's like, well, how do I figure it out? Do you have a website or?
Yeah, it's the erotic blueprint. It's Miss Jaya. They can just, put into a search engine erotic blueprint styles, and Miss Jaya's work will come up.
I'm curious if you've ever worked with someone who you realized had not explored themselves sexually and
Oh
they
yeah.
didn't really know themselves sexually.
Yes, absolutely. I think it is common, of course. In that case, I'll point them to the erotic blueprint. We'll talk about fantasies or what they imagine, or just erotica, like, reading fiction or watching porn, and just watching a variety of porn though, so that they get a sense of like what's potentially out there.
I recently interviewed someone who had a client who realized that she didn't know herself sexually, but then she realized she didn't really want to figure it out with a romantic partner because that's a very reciprocal exchange.
Yes.
She wanted something that was all about her figuring
Yes.
it out.
Yes.
And so she hired a sex worker, is what I
Hmm.
was told. Um, and she had whatever experience she needed in order to explore herself. I'm curious your thoughts about this world of sex work.
Yeah, well, I've had a similar thing where clients have had sex workers or sexological body workers or sexual surrogates. They're sort of different. They're not all the same, right? They're different fields within sort of a similar genre. And they've had incredible experiences. If they're partnered, ideally their partner's consenting that and they know that this is happening. But I've seen exactly what you said, that they get to really focus on them and awaken their sexuality with the safety of someone where that's their profession. And then they can bring it back to their relationship in a different way. So I think it's great.
So then jumping off of that, it's interesting though, because again, it's such a stigmatized industry, even
Yeah.
down to OnlyFans or cam models. That's part of the,
Yeah.
but I've also seen, similarly to the example we both shared, I've also seen so many people find healing from
Yeah.
it.
Right. It can be deeply therapeutic, deeply healing, it can be awakening of one's sexuality, and it can be healing and therapeutic of one's sexuality or sexual trauma.
Mm.
Yes. Right. So, I mean, I think if we see the field itself as the industry as neutral, it's like it's what people's intentions are. Right. So, on one end, you have people who are doing deep healing and therapeutic work. And then you have people that are embracing their pleasure. And that's a beautiful thing and their sexuality. And then, yes, do people misuse it? Are they avoiding maybe themselves or a relationship or actual intimacy through that mechanism? That happens too, right? Or the people that are in the industry might not be treated well in the way that they need to be, right? So the whole gamut happens.
Absolutely. And that's actually one of the reasons I think that the industry at large needs to be put on top and not underground.
Yes.
Because when things are underground and hidden and secret, that's when they aren't as safe.
Yes.
When they're on top and regulated, and we can see what's going on, it becomes much safer for everyone, I think.
Yeah, especially women who can be more vulnerable to being taken advantage of in these fields.
In the clients you've worked with that hadn't really known themselves sexually, was that having repercussion or effects or showing up in other areas of their life?
I think so. Yeah. Where they initially might come in and describe themselves as depressed. But then as they explore their sexuality, that depression shifts significantly. So it could be something like that. Or as people explore their sexuality, their creativity comes alive in a new way. That impacts their work. Yeah. So I've seen, yeah, the way it can spread into more than just sex and relationship itself. Absolutely.
What was it about, or what do you think it is about exploring one's sexuality and losing or relieving symptoms of depression?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with this specific person, um, there was trauma around the shutting down of their sexuality and not allowing it. And so for them, as they were allowing their desires, their wants, not to feel like those desires or wants were bad or devious, but actually fine, even healthy, it gave them permission. I think that's what it was. It gave them permission to be themselves.
That's exactly it, because it's like at the end of the day, we're sexual. I mean, we're wired that way. We can't really change that. Some people are less sexual,
Yeah.
but we're all sexual to some degree, even if we're saying that we don't want anything to do with sexuality for whatever reason. And so when we completely shut ourselves off from that truth, we're
Mm-hmm.
truly shutting ourselves off from a part of ourselves.
Hmm. Right. I mean, I do think there's people who are genuinely asexual, but that's different than shutting down one's sexuality when you actually are an asexual.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's a true just, and for anyone listening who's not clear, will you define asexuality for us?
Yeah, and it has several definitions. So my apologies if this isn't the perfect definition to anyone who defines themselves as asexual or ace. Because I've done interviews with several people and I get different definitions as well. But the overall would be someone who either doesn't feel a sexual energy at all. That's one way people define it, or they do feel sexual energy, but it's more about within themselves and they don't necessarily feel attraction or a sexual polarity with other people. And yet, these people might still choose to have sex even without that sense of sexual attraction or erotic energy, or they might choose to not have sex. So there's like a lot of ways it happens. Yeah.
No, I think that's a really like clear,
Yeah.
broad definition of
It
it.
is an umbrella term. Yeah. Not a singular term.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah.
If you could give one message to everyone in the world,
Mm.
human connection, human sexuality,
Yeah.
what would that message be?
I think it's sort of what we just touched on a moment ago, like permission to be you. Like really, people having the permission and the allowance to whatever in them wants to arise. Of course, then if they enact that with someone else, it needs to be consensual, right? But the permission that within you, your desires to be there, and that's okay.
I love that. Yeah, that is one of the goals of these interviews is to just give, well, first of all, to put factual information out
Yeah.
there. Um, from people who are actually, research, studied, worked in
Mhm.
the field, but also to give people the permission that many never got to explore
Yeah.
themselves, to know
Right.
themselves in that way.
Yeah. And I would to add on to that, I'd say some of the work I love to do with clients is we look at the guarding on their heart and we like explore more internally, like what's the protection around your heart and the layers of protection that have built up around your heart and what it's like to sort of work through that and be able, even if it's initially just with yourself, but to feel your heart start to open again. And similar, we can do that sort of with the genitals or sexuality of like how many layers of stuff is sort of on top of this and it doesn't feel like that energy is open and flowing.
So when you say, kind of checking the guarding on people's hearts, would that be like wounds in,
Yeah,
okay,
it would be wounds and then the takeaway from those wounds,
right.
right? We might have had hurt and then we make a story, a narrative up about who we are, who others are, what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. And that becomes just as damaging because it keeps us from experiencing more love and giving more love. Yeah. So the wounds and then the interpretations on top of those wounds.
Yeah, that's actually a really important nuance between the two
Mhm.
of like what happened and then what that you made that mean for you.
Exactly. The meaning that was put on it. Right.
Is there anything about your work, human connection or sexuality that we didn't talk about, but it's on your mind or your heart to share and you want to?
Mm-hmm. A great question. I think sort of too, like allowing people to just imagine is monogamy or like, are they doing monogamy because that's the default that they're supposed to do or because it's genuinely what they want to do? And I am an advocate, even though I'm known as sort of someone who promotes polyamory, I'm actually quite an advocate for conscious monogamy and exclusivity. But for people to come to that through their own knowing versus just the default of what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I think that's the key is just confirm that this is what you want.
Yeah. Right. And it might change through the years. Yes. But for people to just allow that sort of that seed to get planted of like, what would you actually want? What would be your ideal?
When you wrote your book, what was the inspiration behind that?
Hmm. It came from the clients I was talking about and starting to want, I wanted to figure out why people were coming to me, opening up, already open, and it was hard. But the answer wasn't, don't do this. The answer wasn't, go back to monogamy. So I really wanted to figure out what were sort of the archetypal hardships of people practicing non-monogamy, and then how do you support those things to transform. So that was really the inspiration of the two books, Polysecure and Polywise.
And I forget, did you have a co-author with?
For Polywise, I did. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, David Cooley. And we've been in each other's lives over 20 years. We were married for 10. We got divorced. But then after a year of living apart, we have since been living back together. We're co-parent our child together. We co-authored together. We live in the same house. So we're really sort of partners of life.
And is it not romantic? And by the way, you do not
It's
have to answer.
no, totally. We're a completely open book about it. Yeah. So it's no longer a romantic or sexual relationship. But we were married for 10 years where we were romantic and sexual. Yeah.
Wow, okay. So I really enjoy hearing examples like this because,
Yeah.
like me personally, I grew up in a home where my parents separated and then it was like animosity really
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah.
And my dad remarried and animosity grew. And so when there are these examples of people that are like, no, just because there's a divorce or separation or whatever the case is, it doesn't mean that everyone has to hate each other now.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love that shining example. And I want to see more of that. Or also sometimes, and I think actually the polyamorous community is pretty good at this.
Yeah.
When there's children involved, it's like, okay, we're not setting this up where the children are losing a parent or they only see that parent every now and then. Now they're missing them. It's you still have your parents exactly the same, and you
There's
have
more loving adults around too. Exactly.
that's more gifts at Christmas, whatever the case is, it's more love and attention for the kids and making it mean that for the kids,
Yeah.
making sure it means that for the kids as opposed to, uh-oh, like, okay, well, mom hates her and him, but I kind of like them, or, whatever the case is, or
Yeah. No, exactly. Like our son, he's never lost either of us as his attachment figures. We've always stayed intact as a family. But he does have other adults in his life that adore him. And it's a different relationship and it's beautiful and beneficial.
yeah, I really love that. And I'm curious your thoughts on, is this something we're kind of evolving more into, or is
I
this
think
something that
so.
was years ago?
Yeah,
Like,
I think we're evolving more into it. As the nuclear family is getting deconstructed, and as we've been in this wave of, sort of single parenting and divorced families having this animosity, like you're saying, people are like, can we do this differently? Because that's, neither of those models are actually working. So there is sort of, I think, this move towards a different modern family where the adults are able to be loving and kind and respectful and in each other's lives and more creative with what family looks like.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. My final question for you, and I think it's a great question for you. What do you think are our next steps, either individually or collectively,
Mhm.
in laying the foundation for a more sexually well, sexually positive society?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the next steps are starting, well, with our own healing. Obviously, I'm biased as a therapist to say exploring like what within and then interpersonally in relationship needs to be healed around sexuality. It's hard to separate that from like global patriarchy and colonialism, like these larger societal and global things that still exist is also related to that. So when we do even that inner work where it is political in some ways, even though it might just feel like it's within self or within our relationship. And then I think how we parent and talk to our children about their bodies, about sexuality, about love, about permission, to be themselves, to be respectful, to, of course, pursue consent, but that they're allowed to be who they are. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Yes, this is great.